Mission Impossible Dead Reckoning Part 2 The Final Reckoning. The eighth and most likely final film in the Tom Cruise tricks movie executives into paying him millions of dollars to try to end his own life film series. This is a series that I very much grew up with. I can't remember when I first watched the Mission Impossible movies. I can't remember what order I watched them in, but I'm reasonably sure that the first one I saw in theaters was Ghost Protocol, and I've been faithfully watching every release since. I like this series a lot. I can't remember most of it because Ghost Protocol is the only movie I've seen more than once, but I do like them. It's weird, I'm like Schrodinger's cat, but instead of opening the box to find out if I'm alive, you open the box to find out if I'm a genuine fan of these movies. And I'm not sure. I've liked all of them. Granted, some of them I haven't seen since my frontal lobe developed, so that might change on a rewatch, but I do like them. They're really fun action films, the fight choreography is great, the acting is great, and of course there are the stunts. Man, can you imagine how much better that would have looked if Tom Cruise was CGI? Those stunts are probably 87% of the reason I like these movies so much. Tom Cruise is an insane person. Between this film series and Top Gun, he's learned to skydive, fly helicopters, and fly military jets just for the sake of his films. He's physically scaled the Burj Khalifa, hitchhiked on the side of a jet while it took off, set the world record for longest amount of time holding his breath, holding it for a total of 6 minutes straight while filming underwater scenes for Mission Impossible Rogue Nation, hitchhiked on a helicopter while it was in flight, and hitchhiked on 2 separate biplanes. And he broke his ankle while jumping across rooftops during the filming of Mission Impossible Fallout. Yeah, all that, and the only time he sustained a notable injury was jumping between 2 buildings. You can't write this stuff. If you're wondering why I'm spending so much of this video talking about everything else Tom Cruise has done in these movies, it's because I don't really have much to say about The Final Reckoning. Let's start with the basics. Final Reckoning is a direct sequel to the previous Mission Impossible installment, Dead Reckoning Part 1. Yes, Part 1. You'll notice there is no Part 2 anywhere in this film's title. That's because Mission Impossible Dead Reckoning Part 1 came out at the same time as Barbie and Oppenheimer, and as a result, it got absolutely mauled by the rabid cocaine bear that was the Barbenheimer phenomenon. The movie made a small amount of money, enough to break even, but that's probably it. It broke even. Any other movie would not have gotten a sequel at all, but Tom Cruise is one of the feudal lords of Hollywood, and so he got another Mission Impossible anyway. But Tom Cruise is also a very savvy businessman, and so there were some changes made. First, ditch that title. No one went to see Part 1, there's no way they'll go and see Part 2. Who cares that we'll now have a movie titled Part 1 with no Part 2? We don't, we want money! So Dead Reckoning Part 2 was retitled The Final Reckoning, final here signifying the fact that they were intending this to be the final film. This, by the way, was something Tom Cruise had already been saying in interviews before Dead Reckoning Part 1 had even come out. That he was going to be retiring from the role as Ethan Hunt, and that if Mission Impossible continued, it would be with a new actor playing a new lead character. So, now we've got a new title to distance ourselves from the last movie that underperformed, and it also reflects the fact that we want this to be the last movie about Ethan. Everything's good. Except not entirely. What you can't just ignore is that Dead Reckoning Part 1 was Part 1. The story it was telling wasn't finished, and so now you have this problem. You're trying to get more people to come see this than the last one, but they'll be coming to see a movie that's starting halfway into the story that you started in the last one. So what do? Do you just scrap it all and start a new story? That's probably going to disappoint me and the other 5 people who went to see Part 1, so that's not ideal. But you also want people who didn't show up for the last one to show up for this one, and if they do, then they'll be confused by the fact that they're watching a movie which is already halfway through the story. So what do? How about you have the first 30 minutes of this movie summarize the events of the last movie? Oh, that's brilliant. I am not exaggerating. Obviously, I wasn't timing it in the theater, but the first 30 or so minutes is just recapping the previous movie. It starts with narration explaining what happened in Dead Reckoning Part 1, then Ethan gets a message from the president summarizing the last movie again, and what has been going on in the 6 months since then. Okay, pause. Now we have to talk about this. This makes no sense. This movie establishes that Ethan has been in hiding for 6 months after the events of Part 1, even though he has no reason to. He ends the last movie having the information and the things necessary to take down Skynet. Also, side note to a side note, that is the villain of these two movies, a self-aware AI that wants to kill all humanity. The villain of these movies is just Skynet. To be fair, though, I can't blame Tom Cruise and company for wanting to make a movie about the evils of AI, because the last few years have proven beyond a shadow of a doubt that we as a society have not learned our lesson from Terminator. Anyway, as I was saying, Ethan ends the last movie with everything he needs to take down Skynet, but then this movie establishes that he's been sitting around doing nothing since. There's no reason for this other than the fact that this movie was clearly rewritten after Part 1's failure to try to distance itself from Part 1 as much as possible, and this would be one of those rewrites. If this movie were actually written as a Part 2 to Dead Reckoning, it most likely would have picked up directly where the last one ended and hit the ground running, but we've got to pretend that this movie is separate from the last one to create the illusion that it is its own self-contained story. Back to the plot, we have a narration summary and an in-universe summary, and then we have a scene where Tom Cruise gets kidnapped by the main human villain of the two movies to re-establish him as a threat, escapes, and talks to Ultron directly and gets more exposition about what the plot of these two movies is. And this is all before the opening title sequence. This movie has a prologue of nearly 30 minutes. Why? Because this movie is a Part 2, whether they will admit it or not, and no one went to see Part 1. Also, spoiler for the rest of this video, it's these kinds of meta things I'm going to be talking about for most of this video. There really is just not much to say about the plot. Ethan has to stop Skynet from getting control of the world's nukes and nuking humanity into extinction. To do that, he has to find a submarine which got destroyed and buried in the waters of Antarctica, where Skynet's source code is kept, extract its source code, and then transfer its source code to a container where it will no longer have access to the World Wide Web, where it can infiltrate different governments and hack their nuclear warheads. Ethan does all these things and kills John DeVillen in the process, and everyone lives happily ever after. Not even making fun of the plot, it's just very basic. I want to focus on the movie as a finale to Mission Impossible. We live in an era where it has become common for a single story to be told over many installments. Just look at the MCU, Harry Potter, Game of Thrones, etc. It's become very much a conscious thing in the cultural zeitgeist that if a series goes on for long enough, it's got to have an ending that properly ties up all of the plot points which have been seeded over the course of each installment. This is why stories like the aforementioned Harry Potter are so beloved. They have endings which take all of the disparate plot points that have been set up over 7 books/8 movies and pays them off. You get to see the conclusion to the story and the character arcs that have been getting built up in each installment. Mission Impossible can't do that. Mission Impossible can't do that because Mission Impossible did not do any of the things I just described over its 8 movies. The only characters which appear in every film are Ethan Hunt and Luther Stickle. For the first 3 movies, Ethan has a completely different team helping him in each movie and different love interests in each movie. Mission Impossible Ghost Protocol, the 4th movie, was the first one to actually start acknowledging previous movies. It managed to remember Simon Pegg was a character, and that Ethan had been married in Mission Impossible 3, and it even managed to create a compelling narrative thread out of the latter, establishing that after the events of Mission Impossible 3, Ethan separated from his wife, faked her death, and placed her in witness protection so that no one would be able to harm her. Following this radical approach established by Ghost Protocol, future movies started bringing back more characters, including Jeremy Renner, until he dipped to make more Marvel movies, Alec Baldwin as the new director of IMF, Sean Harris as the villain Solomon Lane, Rebecca Ferguson as rogue agent Ilsa Faust, and even going so far as to have an emotional payoff for Ethan's former wife in Mission Impossible Fallout, capping it all off with Dead Reckoning Part 1 and Final Reckoning, each bringing back characters who had not appeared since the very first Mission Impossible film. Starting with 4, each consecutive film made a concerted effort to present itself as an installment in a larger series. But they did not make much of an effort to tell a larger story. Rogue Nation doesn't pick up any narrative threads from Ghost Protocol, and Fallout ends all of the narrative threads that were set up in Rogue Nation, meaning that Dead Reckoning Part 1 story was a completely new adventure for Ethan and team, which this movie is ostensibly wrapping up. So at absolute worst, you can say that Mission Impossible 8 is wrapping up the epic story which was started in Mission Impossible 7. It's not wrapping up a story started in 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, or 6, and you can tell that 7 and 8 were both really insecure about that. I mentioned earlier that these two films feature characters who haven't appeared since Mission Impossible 1. Those characters are former IMF director Eugene Kittredge and CIA analyst William Donlow. In addition to that, Final Reckoning makes repeated reference to the first film, even having Donlow give Ethan a knife he left in the CIA in the first film, as, I dunno, some kind of symbolic gesture of everything coming full circle. You know that one movie from 30 years ago which has nothing to do with this one? It was all leading to this, buddy. Bet you're glad you stuck around to the end of Mission Impossible Endgame. These movies also reference Ethan's past a lot. Ethan, like all IMF agents, joined the agency because he committed some unspecified heinous crime implied to be murder and agreed to join IMF to get his record expunged. It is heavily implied in these final two movies that he was framed for said murder by John DeVillen, and it is also implied that the person who was murdered was a personal connection both of Ethan's and DeVillen's. This is her. According to the credits of Dead Reckoning Part 1, her name is Marie. I do not know anything else about her. Yes, Dead Reckoning Part 1 set up a mystery involving this woman, her identity, who she was to Ethan, and what DeVillen did to her, which Final Reckoning does not answer. It's forgotten about her. She's never mentioned in this film. They set up a mystery box in Part 1, and then they forgot about the mystery box when they decided to make a sequel that wasn't called Part 2. Even J.J. Abrams is blushing at this one. Speaking of JJ, let's talk about Mission Impossible 3. Why? Because this is the movie everything has been leading to, that's why. Turns out, fool that I am, I didn't realize that Mission Impossible 3, a film directed by a different man, written by a different man, and completely unreferenced by other films aside from Simon Pegg and Ethan's wife, actually is the most important film in this franchise. How? Let me explain.
What are stories but mystery boxes?
We all know J.J. Abrams. He directed the remake of Star Wars Episode 4, and then he directed Star Wars Episode 9, and he has not been allowed to direct a movie since.
Somehow Palpatine returned.
Wait. Oh, no. J.J. made MI3 back when he was still Hollywood's golden boy. Everyone wanted a piece of the Abrams, so he made MI3. And in MI3, he did what he did best, and made it all about a mystery box.
What are stories?
A mystery box is a box that you don't know anything about. What's inside it? Who are Rey's parents? Maybe the box is empty. Maybe her parents are nobody. Maybe when your child is upset you gave them an empty box for Christmas, you hastily stuff a salt and pepper shaker inside. Maybe Rey's dad is a clone of Palpatine.
Somehow.
You get the idea. JJ puts something in his movie that is designed to make you go, ooh, what dat? And then he goes to get a pack of cigarettes and never comes back. This is what happened with MI3. Ethan's job in that movie is to steal something called the Rabbit's Foot and return it to the US government. What is the Rabbit's Foot? Wouldn't you like to know? Probably Palpatine or something.
Somehow.
Never once in the movie is it explained what the Rabbit's Foot is. It's just a thing Philip Seymour Hoffman wants and a thing the US government wants, so Ethan gets it and returns it to the US. The end. Until now. Skynet is the rabbit's foot. Apparently. Now, I will say, I like the attempt that the writers are making here. We want to treat this as an epic conclusion to our film series, but there are no plot threads we can pick up for it. Hey, didn't J.J. Abrams make one of these movies? My God, you're brilliant! I way prefer this kind of writing, where you try to make use of another writer's work in a way that will push the story forward to help make all the installments feel more connected, than saying that Luke was on his island because he almost killed his nephew in his sleep. If I had a nickel for every film series that had to make use of J.J. Abrams' mystery box nonsense after he dipped out, I'd have 2 nickels. But it's weird that it happened twice. And that the 2 it happened with were Star Wars and Mission Impossible of all things. Anyway, the rabbit's foot is Skynet now. They clearly made that up, and I feel kind of condescended to by the fact that they think they can trick me into believing this was always part of the larger planned story, but I respect the attempt at least. A for effort, see me after class about the execution. So now we've got an 8th film, which is wrapping up a plot line from MI3 featuring returning characters from 1, in addition to the characters that they've already brought back, like Simon Pegg and Ving Rhames. All of this is stuff that I like. I respect that they're finally acknowledging a movie that came out before 4, and that the acknowledgements go beyond simply bringing characters back. Shame about all the other things, though. They forgot about Ethan's mysterious past with John DeVillen and Marie. They have numerous flashbacks to previous films but never show footage of Jeremy Renner, despite the fact that he was in 2 of these things, which is weird, but probably explained by the fact that he publicly stated he had no interest in returning to the franchise, and even turned down an offer to appear in Fallout because they were planning to kill him, and he had decided it wasn't worth flying out just to get killed. I wouldn't be surprised if there's some bad blood there because he wouldn't play ball. Rebecca Ferguson doesn't appear, despite the fact that she was in 3 previous movies and had been set up as Ethan's new love interest. But to be fair, she doesn't appear because her character gets killed off in the last one, and that was due to the fact that Ferguson was busy making the Dune movies. Like I said, the movies had been pretty obviously establishing her as a new love interest for Ethan, and her death is pretty obviously a last-minute decision done because she was too busy to keep making these movies. Unfortunate, not their fault, but I think it does bear mentioning when talking about how this movie tries to portray itself as the conclusion to a multi-film story. Even the plot lines that they had been setting up don't get paid off because of schedule conflicts. Ethan's wife doesn't make an appearance, but that's because her arc with Ethan was wrapped up in Mission Impossible 6, which I only bring up to say that Mission Impossible 6 actually feels like more of a culmination of this series' storyline than this movie does. So, to summarize, this film features the culmination of the Rabbit's Foot storyline, which was previously included in MI3, but they resurrected for this movie. It features closure between Ethan and Don Lowe, who was punished after Ethan infiltrated the CIA under his watch, something which was never brought up in any of the movies before this one, by the way. It features the conclusion of the storyline set up 1 movie ago about Skynet, the epic showdown between Ethan and the man who ruined his life and forced him to join the IMF, who was never mentioned before Dead Reckoning Part 1, by the way, and it does not feature the payoff of Ethan and Ilsa's budding romance because Rebecca Ferguson was too busy making Dune. It does not feature the payoff of Ethan's strained relationship with his ex-wife because that was paid off 2 movies ago. It does feature Ving Rhames dying, spoiler alert by the way, because this is the last movie and that means you kill off important characters, and that's it. And it is here that I need to change my tune a little and drop a bomb on you. This movie was not actually intended to be the last Mission Impossible. I know, I've been saying this entire time that is what this movie is, the final film, but that's obviously not what they were thinking when they made this. There's no end to Ethan's story, Benji's story, or Grace's story. There's no scene of them riding off into the sunset, or retiring, or sacrificing themselves heroically to save the day. They all survive. and none of them really experience any character beats that would be indicative of their story's ending. In fact, quite the opposite. The film ends with a narration by Ving Rhames about how important what Ethan does for the world is, encouraging him to keep going, followed by a scene of the team meeting up briefly with each other to hand off the Skynet container they have and going their separate ways, in a way that implies they're going off to wait until their next adventure. The ending of this film is virtually indistinguishable from any other MI ending. But if that's not enough for you, Tom Cruise said while promoting this film that, despite his previous statements that he was retiring as Ethan, that he actually still wanted to make more, having been inspired by Harrison Ford coming back to play Indiana Jones at the ripe old age of 176. Then this movie came out and made, so far, $500 million on a budget of $400 million. Just for reference, this budget only includes production. It doesn't include marketing. Box office analysts say that generally you should double a film's production budget to calculate the marketing, which means that this film probably cost about $800 million to make. Yeah, I don't think the boys crunching the numbers are going to be paying for another one of these, boyos. Which is why Tom Cruise conspicuously went back to saying that this was his final Mission Impossible film after it came out. Yeah, this is a movie that is simultaneously trying to work as a conclusion to the Mission Impossible series and sequel bait for a 9th movie. You can tell they were hedging their bets, trying to make a movie that could function as both a final installment and a stepping stone to more. Honestly, that's probably why Ethan's backstory with Marie was dropped from this movie. They might have been thinking about explaining it more in a future movie. Well, you can't win them all. Sorry, Mission Impossible, if you wanted to make more, you probably shouldn't have spent almost $1 billion on this thing. Oh, also, in Dead Reckoning Part 1, there's this character who's called Jasper Briggs, but in this movie he reveals that his real name is Jim Phelps Jr. Why is that important, you ask? Because Jim Phelps was the villain of the first movie! It's that guy's son! Oh my god! It doesn't mean anything. The guy even says to Ethan that it doesn't mean anything. That's like literally dialogue in the movie. He doesn't want revenge. He's just that guy's son. BT dubs. Are you convinced that this movie's wrapping up all the previous ones? No? Oh. Well, regardless, I still enjoyed the movie. I just think it's kind of a mess. The fight scenes and stunts make it worth it, at least for me. And it'll definitely, I think, be worth a watch once it's out on streaming. But I don't know if I would encourage you to go see it in theaters. Thank you so much for clicking on this video, especially so if you stayed until the end. Please like, share, and subscribe, and I hope you found it to be a favorable experience.